Now, it's my distinct pleasure to bring up to the stage our first speakers. Sherri Goodman is the author of Threat Multiplier, a great read, and for everybody's interest, it will be for sale in the lobby along with Thomas Barnett's America's New Map. During the break, you might want to pick one up, and I know they'd be happy to sign them. But joining Sherri Goodman is Captain Andrea H. Cameron of the United States Navy, who will interview her.
Thank you, Jim. So welcome, everyone, today. My name is Andrea Cameron. I teach in the National Security Affairs Department at the Naval War College, and I'm the director of our Climate and Human Security Group. Last year, I also had the privilege of being a Fulbright scholar, doing NATO climate security research while in Brussels. And since 2021, I've been supporting the Pentagon, the Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy, their Arctic and Global Resilience Office. That's the office that does climate policy for the DoD. So that's a little bit about me, but today we're here to interview Sherri Goodman. Welcome to Sherri Goodman. Sherri is a role model and a mentor, a trendsetter. She started in the Senate Armed Services Committee doing nuclear work, and then a brand new position in the 1990s, Clinton administration, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, taking some of those nuclear issues and being very concerned about the environmental impact of them. And that just kind of led to a career of understanding all kinds of environmental and climate impacts. So today, 30 years later, she's literally a leader around the world for energy, climate, environment, and I also think the Arctic. So I have a list of questions for her today. And as Jim mentioned, she has this new book, Threat Multiplier, Climate, Military Leadership, and the Fight for Global Security. This is my clean copy, and for those academics in the room, this is what we do to them. We get to mark them all up. So I've chewed on it and digested it, and I can't wait to ask her a bunch of questions about it. So once again, welcome to Sherri Goodman. Would you like to have any opening remarks for the group?
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. It's a great privilege to be here with you. And thank you to Jim and Presidents Armstrong and Walker for organizing this and for your leadership. It really is a great honor and privilege to be here with all of you today. This is actually my first in-person book event since my book was released last week. And I know my mother, who's on Cape Cod, is watching now. Hi, Mom. She wanted to be here. Okay, but you are here in spirit, always watching over us. And the other great honor is to be here with my heroes. Secretary Kerry, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Reid, who just left. You know, I grew up actually sailing into the waters of Newport, and I worked for Senator Reid's predecessor, the former chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Sam Nunn, in my early career. And then when I served in the Department of Defense as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, and I was commuting, sometimes then Senator Kerry would actually give me a ride, Senator, if you remember, from the airport. We were commuting up to the Hill. And then he made sure that I cleaned up the Massachusetts military reservation during the 1990s. And Senator Whitehouse and I have, and his dear wife Sandra and I have bonded over so many oceans and climate and security issues, and I've been privileged to join him at the Munich Security Conference. So I feel in many ways this is coming full circle for me, and so it's really a wonderful privilege to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Sherri. I'm going to start us off by asking a simple but not simple question, which is, what is climate security? How do you define it?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And I've been working in this field now since I like to say it was created back now almost 20 years ago. And that's to understand how a changing climate affects our security, our national security, our international security, even our human security. And I will say that what's also very notable about this field is that just in the last few years, and we had Senator Reid here, who chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, noted passes the annual defense authorization bill. There's even now a definition of it in law, which is very important because that means that this is now the law of the United States. Climate security is defined as really having 4 components affecting our national security, including infrastructure, also affecting our human security, affecting our stability, and then our allies and partners, and finally having impacts from terrorism to weapons of mass destruction. So really the whole range of effects. And now I know what the next question might be. What is threat multiplier?
What is it? So I'll give a little context to the audience. She is the founder of this term, threat multiplier, since 2007, and it's carried it through even to the title of the book. So yes, could you please describe to us, like, what does threat multiplier mean to you?
Well, you know, after leaving the Department of Defense, after 8 years as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, I was at a Navy research organization, the Center for Naval Analysis. And in 2006, I organized the first group of generals and admirals to assess the national security implications of climate change. And we spent a year studying from the world's leading climate scientists like Jim Hansen and others, and with the intelligence professionals and national security professionals in the US and the UK at the time. And, you know, sitting around a conference room one day at CNA, and I think Secretary Kerry had come and spoken to us at one point as well, so we could really learn from all the best minds. And we were trying to determine, we knew that we could see that there were security implications of climate change affect us in each region of the world, and we wanted to understand how to convey this to both a national security defense audience, but also more broadly. And so that's how the phrase threat multiplier, which is a play on the term force multiplier, common use to, you know, talk about a technology that sort of gives you more performance, more lethality. But in this case, threat multiplier is what extreme heat and sea level rise and wildfires and sea ice retreat and collapse and extreme weather all do to destabilize our natural systems, our Earth systems, that then impact the stability of our security globally.
Thank you, Sherri. Now, you mentioned allies and partners earlier. So for over 30 years, you've been traveling the world and talking to other countries about climate and environment. And now you're one of your more recent roles, you're Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security, so just still a leader in this space globally. But I want to ask you, based on this international engagement, what is the appetite abroad when they come talking to us about talking to the climate security nexus?
Well, I'd say the demand signal is high and getting higher. I mean, from our allies, our close, very close NATO allies and our allies in the Indo-Pacific, they want to move lockstep with us in understanding how it's going to affect our military operations, our military bases, and make the turn on the energy transition together so that we're lifting all our boats, all our ships, all our tanks and aircraft in a similar way. From other allies and partners who are even more deeply affected and less resilient societies, more deeply affected by climate change, they want to know what we're going to do for them in terms of helping them become more resilient, in terms of climate finance, in terms of helping with energy systems, and increasingly health, food, and water systems, those fundamental elements of society.
So I want to bring it also back home, something, you know, where we walk out the door, and we'll talk about the home front. You have a chapter on it in the book, and home base. So in this context, you kind of have a saying that climate readiness is mission readiness. And can you describe what that means?
Okay, well, first I have to give credit to that phrase to Meredith Berger, who I think is either here or coming with the Secretary of the Navy. And I tell Meredith's story in the book. She's the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy Installations and Environment. And like you, Andrea, also what I consider sort of a leading force in climate and national security today. And you know, Meredith very well articulates how being ready to operate in a changing climate condition, whether it's the extreme weather events our forces might find themselves in when they deploy in the Pacific in a future warfight, involving China, or whether it's providing increased humanitarian assistance and natural disaster relief in the face of increasing extreme weather events around the world. When you are ready to respond in any type of climate, you're also ready for that mission.
Now, one of the questions you ask in the book, and I'm going to start with the question, give a little context. How can the military reduce emissions without sacrificing security? And the context was she was writing about her when she was working in the Clinton administration and negotiating the Kyoto Protocol back in the 1990s. But in essence, why am I bringing this up? Because it's still the question today. How can the military reduce emissions without sacrificing security?
Well, Andrea, that's such a good question, and I want to underscore some of the points that Senator Reid already made in talking about why, for example, let's take an example. Why is our military moving to hybrid and electric tactical ground vehicles today? And let's be clear, it's not simply to be green, okay? It's good to be green, but you wouldn't do that, the military wouldn't do that if there weren't mission performance benefits. And not only does it save energy, so we have to procure less fossil fuels, but also, as the Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks recently noted, you get electric vehicles give you better torque and less noise, so a less signature on the battlefield. So now we have finally, in the last, I'd say, decade, kind of broken what was considered to be sort of early in my career, in the early days, we thought, okay, you need more performance in your weapon system, you need to fly faster, have a more powerful weapon system, you need more fossil energy. Okay, that is not the case anymore. That Gordian knot has been broken, and we realize that there are other forms of energy. And also remember, energy efficiency is a very important form of energy that we often underestimate. The energy you don't have to use by improving, let's say, the design. Now we have designs of new aircraft called blended body wing, and they save 30% of fuel efficiency, even on standard fuel. So we have to think of all these different types of creative ways, and we improve our military performance, particularly vis-a-vis competitors. And we have to remember that we're not the only ones thinking this way. All of our global competitors, China in particular, because they are leaders in many renewable technologies, they're also thinking about this in the PLA and how they interact with allies and partners, particularly in the very important Indo-Pacific region.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You've been kind of at the forefront of a variety of things: environmental peace building, building partner capacity, security cooperation programs. So one concept I pulled out of the book, which was new to me, coined by one of our mutual colleagues, Swati Viravalli, who was at our Africa Command and is now on the National Security Council doing climate work. But she coined this phrase, mutually assured resilience. So you might remember mutually assured destruction from the Cold War, but this new idea of mutually assured resilience. And I love that idea, and I was wondering if you could expound on it a little bit.
Yes, thank you. And again, I give Swati credit for that concept. Think back to the concept of a mutually assured destruction, in the Cold War, the concept that Soviet Union and the US with nuclear weapons pointed at each other then would have some stability because we could both annihilate each other, therefore we wouldn't, okay? Now, in the climate, so fast forward from the nuclear era to today's climate era, if only the United States is resilient, or only the United States and Europe is resilient against increasing threats, we will not have global stability. We will continue to have increasingly climate-fueled migration around the world. We will continue to have the geopolitical tensions that exist today because so many countries feel that they cannot cope with climate threats, and their economies and their people are increasingly unable to provide for themselves. So we need to become resilient in a variety of ways, and we benefit by enabling others also to be resilient. That's the concept of mutually assured resilience.
I love that.
I know Secretary Kerry is going to start using that.
And for the next generation, my students, you might hear mutually assured resilience again in the future as well. This is an interesting topic that we're covering today because climate change has become polarized in the United States. It's a difficult conversation to have. But you have worked with people across the political spectrum talking about climate and security. And I was wondering what kind of insights you might have if you're having a conversation about climate security, no matter what your political leaning is.
Right. Thank you, Andrea. And that's an important question. I should say today I have an opinion piece out in the National Interest, which is a conservative organization, talking about why the military is taking climate and energy security seriously and how it helps improve military effectiveness and performance. So, that's how we have to understand the impact on readiness. As Senator Reid said, if we have to continually invest in restoring military bases, for example, that suffered as Guam did in recent Typhoon Mara, an estimated over $5 billion of damage. And that's just one base. We know, for example, Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in Hurricane Michael in 2018 suffered at least $5 billion of damage and is now at a greater cost, becoming the Air Force climate resilient base of the future. Okay, so can we do this all around the country, make those investments? Wouldn't we be better off sort of in understanding how to improve our infrastructure and the resilience of our systems today so that we don't have to wait till the next crisis? I mean, we say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, but we don't want to have to do that, and we don't want to have to lose service members' lives, because increasingly we face Black Flag days where the temperature and the wet bulb temperature is too high for our troops safely to either train or deploy. Those numbers have been growing significantly in the Southwest, and we have, oh, by the way, many of our training bases are in the Southwest of the United States. So that affects our training regimens, and it also could affect where we're going to deploy: Middle East, South Asia, those regions which are on the path to becoming much more unsustainable for human health in the future. And we haven't even talked about infectious disease spread. And we're here in New England. I have a home on Cape Cod. I'm watching those signs about the Triple E and wondering, can I go out, because I might get there might be a mosquito out there that's going to give me something I don't want.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but on the military side, just about everyone I speak to at the different geographic combatant commands, that's how we organize ourselves geographically around the world. A lot of them are telling us at the Naval War College, we need to understand more about disinformation. Disinformation is part of our operational environment, and it's really key and important. And you talk about it a little in the book, because there's this intersection of climate vulnerability, and even you use the word climate weapon, and how disinformation can be connected with climate information. So can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yes, I think, so disinformation across society is a growing concern in every region, in every area, particularly in our political life. But in climate, I would say we already have some real cases where Russia has accused the U.S. of using a climate weapon against some Russian legislators in the Duma a few years ago. In recent heavy rains in the UAE, this last spring, there was reporting that somehow the U.S. or the West had also attempted to alter or intervene in the atmosphere. So I think when we've seen also terrorists take advantage of vulnerable populations, particularly in parts of Africa and Asia, to use this climate disinformation, for example, saying that you can only get your safe water and food from us. So I think this area is going to be one that's going to require increasing attention and analysis, and that our forces, particularly our civil affairs, our special operations forces, those kind of on the front lines in many of these fragile regions of the world, are going to have to be particularly attentive to how information is going to be manipulated.
Thank you so much, Sherri. I think that's a really important part, and a lot of people don't realize how much information and disinformation are part of the security landscape around the world. So that's really important. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and get just a little bit of context because you're going to publicly watch me ask Sherri to do my homework. So the context is the United States has what we call a national climate assessment. Congress requires that we do one every couple years. So the fourth one came out in 2014, and this is a domestic analysis of how climate change affects the United States. But in the fourth one, they had one chapter on international, and in that we had a sliver of national security. And we looked at it really through a DoD lens. The fifth national climate assessment was released less than a year ago, and it still had an international chapter with a little bit more on DoD. Full disclosure, I was the DoD contributing author to that one. But we looked at security from a broader lens: defense, development, and diplomacy, the range of US national interests. Now, why am I asking Sherri to do my homework? I'm the federal lead coordinating author on the upcoming 6th National Climate Assessment, and this time we have a whole chapter dedicated to national security, which just shows you how much security and climate has kind of evolved in the discourse. So I'm asking Sherri to say, what should we put in our chapter for the next one? And you can all read about it in 2027 or in 2028 when it finally comes out. We're just in the start. So you get a chance to shape this document. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Andrea. First, I really want to sing Andrea's praises and tell you all here how special it is to have Andrea Cameron as a Navy captain in the role she plays, really a true leader in this. She is the first to be a full professor at her rank and also to be deeply embedded in leading these key national climate assessments and international documents, something that I think we say it's an other duty as assigned, or like it's not part of your core duties, and it's probably a lot of late nights, but it's deeply important and it helps build what I've been trying to do my whole life, which is mainstream climate and environmental security into our national security. So I really want you to know how special Andrea is for doing that. My answer to your question, and I know that you have already in the last round tried to integrate the 3 Ds, defense, diplomacy, and development in terms of thinking about climate security. I would say you also want to now add a 4th D, which is disaster or disaster risk reduction, because we have to respond to disasters. So I now talk about the 4 Ds. And then I'd say it's increasingly important, and I find this with also a lot of students and young people. I just was actually on a call with a Stanford student on the way driving here who said, well, I'm writing my dissertation is on climate and national security and human security. And what do you think is the difference? And how should we think about that? And, so the concepts of human security, which in my view, many ways are kind of embedded in and are a part of how we think about national security. But for many, they carry a separate and different weight. So bringing that out, particularly in a time we live in where more failed states and weak governance, you can't rely on the state, the national part to protect your security, sort of elevating attention to the human security dimension.
And I'm winking at my students in the room. We literally were talking about this yesterday. So a shout out to the students here from the Naval War College from our climate change and national security class. And I'm so glad this is kind of a natural transition. What's amazing to me about Sherri is she talks to political leaders around the world, senior military officers around the world. But what you've done an incredible job at, as you've kind of launched into your variety of think tanks and your engagement, is you've brought the next generation into this field of study and in so many different ways. So I was just wondering, how have you gone about this, and what is the kind of reception that you have received doing this?
Well, to me, I felt very blessed early in my career to have a few good mentors and advisors. Senator Nunn, former Undersecretary of the Navy, Bob Murray, who was the president of the Center for Naval Analysis, and others I work with in the Department of Defense. In that era, it was all men. But now the world has changed, and thankfully, and so I want to sort of give back, and I want to enable people to see the future. They can't, some say, well, you gotta see it to be it. I don't know about that, but you do have to, it is great to have people you can have access to, and to be able to showcase how you could. So I always try to work with, in whatever capacity, various think tanks or research organizations, always working with the next generation. And actually, I learn a lot because they're thinking about things in different ways than I might naturally. And then, of course, my 3 kids are always reminding me, Mom, well, get real here, Mom. So.
I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up for you guys to ask questions to Sherri Goodman. My first question, if you could give faculty in the audience one message, what would it be?
Well, I think for the faculty, I guess I have 2 messages. One is helping young people with career advice and thinking through how to get the jobs they want. I just find, my kids are just out of college, sort of mid to late 20s now, and I just think that, and I know a lot of people in that age group, and often schools are not good at helping kids move from the classroom to the workplace, and people feel all alone. And then so that's one, and the second is to be a sponsor as well as a mentor. And what's the difference? I mean, you can mentor and have a hour conversation with a lot of different students, and then they go their own way. But a sponsor is somebody who stays with you, who's interested in who you are, maybe cares about your family and your career and kind of where you're going, those sort of whole of you. And that's a different kind of relationship. And I think those are super important. You can't have an unlimited number of those, but for faculty members or others, you can have those, and those relationships are enduring. And so I think that's really important.
Thank you. And you just gave even more examples to my previous question of how much you're engaging the younger generation.
Yeah.
Because that's your role. You have an amazing amount of people around the world who are in those categories. So my last question, if you could give the young people, so the Naval War College, we have mid-career professionals. Here in Salve, we have undergraduate, master's, and doctoral students. But if you could give the young people in the audience one message, what would it be?
All right, before I answer that, I want to make sure, I want to tip my hat and thank you to Tom Barnett, who's going to be a speaker later, because he is a great author and thinker, and he's also put so much into rethinking about the world's maps and about how climate and other factors really affect our demographics, our world, our global security. So thank you, Tom, for being here. He and I have known each other for a long time. My message for the students is you have to be proactive. People aren't going to just hand you something. So, but you can be proactive proactive with the people or the opportunities you want to seek out in a good way and in a gracious way. But I think and to try to cultivate what is your own passion, because if you know what it is, you can go after it. And then you can get the satisfaction of knowing that your job is something that you love doing. And sort of that's the best way to be in life. And I've seen how my kids have sort of evolved. Some knew early on what their passions were. Some took a while to find it. But when they found it, they were like, oh, yeah, I don't want to just work 9 to 5. I really like working. So try to find what your passion is and then go after it.
Thank you, Sherri. All right, let's give a round of applause to Sherri. And I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. So remember, a question has a falling tone. It ends with a question mark. We have some people in the back who have microphones. So if you're interested in asking a question for Ms. Goodman to answer, we will raise your hand and I'll call on you and they'll bring a microphone to ask a question. So I see an ambitious gentleman right there in the blue jacket. Why don't you get the first question?
Yes, hi.
Yes, and if you could say your name and your affiliation, please.
Sure. My name is Nadim Kassir. I work for Bay Coast Bank. in Swansea, Massachusetts.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Andrea H, thank you. My concern is on security, and when we talk about economic migration, we know how charged the topic is today. But in the climate concern, if we talk about the islands, starting with the South Pacific, like Guam and other islands, which could be engulfed by the Pacific within 50 years from today, what are we doing to plan for such cause and such concern?
Thank you very much. Sherri?
That's a great question, and there are many small Pacific Island nations, Kiribati, Tuvalu, others among them, that are existentially threatened by climate and are already seeking other places to move parts of their population when certain atolls become uninhabitable from sea level rise and loss of fresh water. And I interviewed for the book Anote Tong, the former president of Kiribati, who talks about migration with dignity, and how parts of his population can move. They've already secured land in Fiji. They're looking at relationships with other, Indo-Pacific nations as well. I think globally we have not done enough. The UN, is a tough forum in which to change the rules on migration and refugees, which are completely inadequate for the task at hand. I do think in this administration there's been, enduring across a number of administrations, there has been a growing focus on strengthening security across the Indo-Pacific. And that has included by both Secretary Kerry when he served as secretary and his successor, Secretary Blinken, to strengthen our security cooperation partnerships with nations and Pacific Island nations in that region, and be attentive not only to our own Western security concerns of ensuring that we have a force ready to combat Chinese aggression, but also sensitive to their home-based existential security concerns of needing to become climate resilient and needing to provide for their endurance of their populations in the future.
Yes, and we'll hear from the Secretary of the Navy later, but he has significant engagement across the Pacific because of this reason exactly.
I would say, Secretary of the Navy Del Toro has really made this a core part of his global engagement strategy, both in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, and also sharing. The other area is we need to we need to have more what I call precision climate information. Today we have fairly reliable weather out for 1 week, and we have big global climate models that will tell us, what the sea level rise might be out for 50 or 100 years. But we have to close that gap. In an operational sense, the military needs reliable precision climate information that takes you from seasonal to subseasonal, 1 year to 10 year, the 1 to 10 year gap. And that decision-making, climate-based decision-making information is really going to help us a great deal. And there's a lot of work going on now, both within the Defense Department and in the private sector, to develop those kind of systems and then to share them with our allies and partners.
Thank you. Another question. Now I feel like I'm paying favorites, but we'll go to your neighbor down here, and then I'll go behind for the next one.
Thank you. I'm Ross Can. I'm an architect and I'm a teacher here at Salve. On the principle that money talks, has there been any analysis as to the ROI on sustainable development? Because certainly in our world, we're constantly telling clients how much they're going to save by spending a little bit now, and I know that is one potential way to establish bipartisan support behind these initiatives.
Well, there's certainly return on investment analysis is very common in defense whenever you want to propose a new kind of sustainability technology. But if you're talking more broadly about in the development world, I mean, those arguments, yes, are often persuasive, and sometimes they run headlong into, resistance because some are not as interested in supporting that type of development. But I think undergirding a lot of the reforms in process today at global financial institutions and changing how we think about lending rates and climate finance is this sense that if we change up those laws and make it fit more favorable for the World Bank and IMF and other institutions to lend to climate vulnerable nations, they in the long run will become more resilient and will cost the global system less.
All right, I'm going to go to the back over here, and then this side of the audience, you're welcome to ask questions as well, so I'll go over there next. How about right in front of where are you headed? You get to decide. There you go, thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Bill Bagwell. I'm a local resident and a lifetime learner, which is why I'm here. You talked about electric vehicles, on the battlefield and on bases, and we've seen an enormous increase in electric and hybrid vehicles, as consumers. And they're a great way of seeing immediate and measurable ways of reducing our carbon footprint. Great thing. But ultimately, batteries have to be charged, and that puts pressure on the electric grid, and I feel like power stations have themselves a large carbon footprint. Are we thinking about going higher up, maybe it's lower down the pyramid, and thinking about ways to generate electricity on a nationwide basis that are less damaging to the environment? I understand solar and hydro and wind, but it's kind of a very small percentage of the power generations. Are we thinking about things like nuclear and other ways of generating electricity?
A lot of good questions in there. And yeah, first of all, often even in states like Texas, which we think is an oil state, they're getting increasing amount of their energy from wind and solar. So the mix is already changing in many states. Then when we talk about the fragility of the national electric grid, and here I think the Department of Defense is really leading by example for a number of reasons. It's deploying microgrids on most of its major military bases in the next few years, and microgrids will be coming to a community. I mean, Newport may have one in the future, and the value of a microgrid is that you can put distributed energy resources on it. Yes, you could put a diesel generator, but you could also put a small modular reactor in a microreactor in the future, or you could put better batteries, a military base in a Marine Corps base in Albany, Georgia is the first net zero military base in the US, and it has a microgrid where they also have methane from a landfill that they're capturing, sort of a waste to energy plant to help power that along with other sources. So we're in this transition where we're moving off the challenge of powering your electric vehicle to a more distributed system. We also need better batteries, right? So you can have both reduce your range anxiety, go longer, but also then we need to rethink the global supply chains for those materials like lithium and cobalt. That's a whole nother area the U.S. has to really as thinking through how to friendshore and onshore both not only the mining of those materials, but also the processing, and then ultimately the recycling of those, so that you can have a full supply chain of the materials and minerals you need to power the green energy future.
Excellent answer, Sherri. And I'll just piggyback on that a little bit. One of the things we're really looking at is energy diversification, which you described in detail very well. And we also are thinking, you don't want to swap one dependency on one fuel source for one dependency on another. So that's why energy diversification is a lot of the conversations we're having within the DoD.
And if I could give a shout out to Senator Whitehouse here, who I recall joined forces with former Senator Inhofe to champion advanced nuclear modernization. And I had the privilege of introducing them both when they presented their legislation a few years ago at the Atlantic Council. And of course, they did not see eye to eye on climate change, but they did join forces together to advance new nuclear technologies. So thank you.
All right, next question, we'll go over here. I'm still looking to this side.
Hi, my name's Greg Nurgen with Fast Forward Energy. We're commercializing ways to make fossil fuel power and heat production as well as waste to energy CO2 free, which could eliminate 50% of our CO2 emissions in the next 10 years. So my question is, assuming that can happen, what impact does that have on the military's perspective on climate change? And also, do you think that elimination of 50% of the world's CO2 every year would stop sea level rise, stop the storms, stop everything, all the other negative things that we hear about all the time?
Two great questions. I mean, the first one is, that's why we measure in terms of net zero now. It doesn't mean no fossil energy, but it means net zero. So if you can reduce emissions from your fossil energy, that's a very important goal. Will that alone stop sea level rise? No, because so much of it is already baked in. I went to Greenland this summer, and I saw the melting of the vast Greenland ice sheet, which alone, combined with the West Antarctic ice sheet, could potentially contribute, feet to global sea level rise, several feet, over 5 feet, within the next 50 to 75 years. So much of that is because we've already put so much CO2 into the atmosphere. It doesn't mean we should stop trying to reduce. We have to reduce, and we have to become resilient. We have to deal with the challenges we face today. For example, the Naval Academy, they've already faced a lot of sea level rise. They've got a lot of investment in sort of shoring up, that. But so our major cities on the East Coast are going to need to do the same thing in the coming decades.
All right, next question up front here. So we'll bring a microphone.
I'll take one from this side of the room.
Yay!
Hi, Dr. Sandra Whitehouse. I'm with the Ocean Conservancy. Sherri and I have worked together on a lot of different ocean issues. And since we're here in the ocean state, I'm wondering if you would say a few words about what you think are the most dire of the climate change impacts on national security when you're thinking about the Atlantic, the AMOC current declining, sea level rise, probably the one that we hear the most about, ocean acidification. From your research and your writing, are there any of those that stand out as the one that keeps you up at night the most?
Great question, Sandra. Well, and it's certainly true that most of the climate tipping points we think about and are concerned about are ones that have to do with the oceans and changes in ocean, whether it's the changing Atlantic meridional overturning circulation belt, the belt that gives us the Gulf Stream. So if it's already started to waver, but if it should collapse, that could send us into a whole different kind of temperature and weather cycle in this part of the world and in Europe, or the collapse of the more even rapid melt of the West Antarctic, and certain ice sheets could raise sea levels. This tipping point phenomenon, which is very heavily studied by global climate scientists, the important thing is to understand kind of what that means. We have a lot of gradual climate change occurring now. Every summer it's hotter and hotter, right? Or even in this part of the world, it's hotter, our summers are longer, and it's deadly hot in other parts of the world. And those changes, you can plot them, they're happening gradually. But what Sandra is referring to and what climate scientists worry about is not just the gradual change, but think of the chair. Okay, maybe the chair is starting to tip, but at some point it's going to fall all the way over and then it can't be put back up. So those tipping points in climate change, I think the ones, the probabilities, when you look at the probabilities, Sandra, I'd say, it's the melting of the ice sheets is right up there. The AMOC, I think, has a slightly low, it's very severe, but maybe a lower probability. We're talking about, lower probability, but very high consequence events, just as we talked about in the nuclear era. We thought about nuclear war as a low probability but high consequence event, so it was worth investing billions of dollars of GDP. I do think we need to become more resilient. We need to basically understand a lot more about the oceans than we do today. I know you and Senator Whitehouse have been huge champions of making sure we understand more about the oceans, because we often know more about space than we know about the deep ocean. So those investments, which will give us more fidelity and a better ability to predict when and if those tipping points are likely to occur.
All right, we got another question from this side of the room.
Thank you both very much. I'm a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, but now I run a nonprofit that focuses on the training and development of municipal leaders. And I have a question for both of you. How would you describe the quality of the partnerships within the federal agencies and the Defense Department on climigration and all the networks and systems that will be affected and will affect citizens, particularly in cities and towns? Because most of the 911 calls are going to municipal leaders. So for all of the climigration in the country now and all the climate change issues in the country now, the front line of defense is at the municipal level. My hope is that you have a positive answer to this question.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your many years of service in EPA. I have two observations. One, yes, our frontline workers in health, fire, emergency services are the front line of defense to climate threats. Increasingly, our National Guard and even our active duty military are called up to support those frontline workers from floods, fires, and hurricanes. In fact, the head of the National Guard Bureau talks about, we no longer have a fire season. We have fire all year round. And the National Guard is deployed now, I think at a rate of almost 10 times the rate of person years as it was just 5 years ago in fighting wildfires around the U.S. and around the U.S. So we are also using our military as backup to what we call defense support to civilian authorities. Now, as to the partnerships between the agencies, my experience, I'll tell you, when I came into the Department of Defense in the early 1990s, it wasn't particularly good on environmental issues. The Department of Defense was being sued a lot, and I and others, we set around to really change that and to create an era where we worked in partnership with EPA and state environmental agencies. In fact, I think at the time, Trudy Cox, is she still the head of the Newport Historical Association? She was EPA Region 1. No, she was the state EPA director, and the EPA Region 1 director, John DeVillers. Okay, they didn't particularly like the Department of Defense initially when we came in, and I said, okay, you guys, we got to work together. We got to figure out what to do that's right for the Massachusetts military reservation here. And eventually we put in pumping stations. I even provided fresh water to the towns. I met with all the municipal water leaders in the town surrounding that base. And that's just one example. I actually, we were closing a lot of bases in that era, and the President Clinton, wanted to fast-track cleanup at military bases. Now, any of you, Admiral, who's ever cleaned up a military base, knows that there's nothing inherently fast about the process, right? Because government processes are designed to be effective and inclusive, not necessarily fast. But President Clinton wanted to go fast because he made a lot of commitments to the communities that were affected by the closing bases in California and other parts of the country. So I said, oh, we got to do something here now. And EPA said, well, you know, that's very nice. You want to go fast, but we don't have the staff to go fast. So I said, okay, we're going to transfer funding from the Department of Defense budget to EPA. And we did, so that they could hire more staff so we could meet the requirement to do the reviews and the assessments we needed for the environmental contaminants at military bases faster. I would say today in the climate era, first of all, there's a lot of enthusiasm in this administration. The people who are working on climate and security, like Andrea, when you meet Meredith Berger, when she comes with, and Secretary Del Toro, they are passionate.